All right, so in this video, we're going to continue talking about Maya modeling tools. Um, in this particular aspect, we've already covered the extrude tool as well as some moving tools. But what we're going to cover now is the bevel tool. So I'm going to go ahead and create a simple primitive object, and it doesn't really matter which one, but I'm going to start with the cube because the bevel tool can work in almost any polygon tool. It does have different results though on which ones you use. So I'm going to go ahead and create a cube here, and we're going to talk about how to particularly use this tool. Now the bevel tool can be used in any subcomponent mode. So if you right click and hold, you again go to vertex mode, edge mode, face mode, or object mode, and we can manipulate any of these modes with the bevel tool. And it behaves a little bit differently in each one. Most common way to use the bevel tool, however, is in edge mode, because what the bevel tool at its core is doing, it's taking an edge or some sort of subcomponent and turning it into a face. It will technically work on a vertex mode as well, but most commonly it's used on an edge. So again, create an object. You can right click and hold and change your subcomponent mode when you're hovering over the object. Right click and hold on an object, and you scroll up to edge mode, and again this will turn blue, and you can click on edges, and this allows me to select those edges, and those edges can be manipulated just like before, like using the W key or the move them around, or you can scale them, or you can use your various tools. The bevel tool is found under the edit mesh menu, I believe. I always forget because there's a quick key for it. Or you can use the quick key, which is Control B. So if you see, if I come in here and I have this edge selected and I hit Control B, it will take this edge and turn it into a face, as such. Now, when you do the bevel, it turns that edge into a face. It automatically kind of slants, almost like it took a slice out of it, and it opens this little input window over here of all the parameters that it's currently doing the bevel operation at. It says polybevel 01. For example. So I don't use all these. In fact, I haven't used mitering too much, but we can cover some of these basic ones here. Fraction, for example, what fraction does, it determines the distance of the bevel from the shortest edge. And what that means is Maya can only bevel as far as the shortest edge, because otherwise if you go over that, it starts breaking the model. So what that is it's always defaults to 0.5. Whatever the shorter edge on this is, it's going to go about halfway that distance. If this was a perfect cube, it would be perfectly cut in like that section. But I drew this out by hand. It's probably slightly off. To showcase this, what this does, we can drag this left and right. And again, it's always going to go to the shorter edge. So if you set this to 1, it turns out the top edge was my shorter edge. It's going to go all the way to that edge, and then it goes as far as it possibly can on the other edge, the longer edges. So the longer face is actually probably more correct terminology here. And again, I can drag this back and forth, drag the fraction back and forth, and I can adjust this, or I can type in numbers directly. Now, yeah, I'll go ahead and back up just to I'm going to cover show a cube again, but more extreme here, just so you make it clear what the fraction does. So if I do this again, you can see again fraction goes half that edge. So you can see if we draw an imaginary line here, just to kind of drive this home, 50%. Oh, okay, so it's going about halfway, and it can't. The other one just kind of falls where it may. So you can see can't go any farther. Now, if you were to go in here and type above it, it would let you, but it would break. So you can see that's going now dropping beneath that surface right there, and it's completely broken. So obviously, I don't really know the reason you would do this, but you could do that. So that's fraction. It determines the distance to the shortest edge that it will go. If you had a perfect cube, it would be perfect though. So I come in here, create a new cube, go into the inputs, again in the channel box, inputs. We can straight up say the size of it instead of dragging. So I'll just make them all 8, for example. And if I were to come in here and do an edge, and since this is a perfect cube and I bridge this, you can see that it happens to be the same on both sides because they happen to be the same in this case. Most of the time that's not the case, especially if you draw it by hand. So fractions controls that. Segments is the number of faces that it turns into. So again, bevel, what it does is turns a subcomponent, in this case edge, into a face. And by default, it is one segment, one face. It's a one-to-one. You can increase this number, and what it does is it rounds, but again, by default, it rounds out the form with more divisions you have. So the more geometry you have, generally, the rounder you can make an object. And this is true for the bevel. So right now it's 1, so it's just very planar. But if I increase the segments, it will automatically round out the form. You can see if I increase, and all I'm doing is clicking on the word segments right here, and left clicking and holding. And it's true for all these. So just left clicking, holding, and dragging my mouse left and right. So you can see I can adjust the segments. So if you want to make some rounded shape on one edge, accidentally clicked off of it, you can do that. Depth is pretty straightforward. This was a great feature that they added. They added a while ago, but for the longest time this was not in here. If I increase or decrease the depth, by default 1 is a bevel out, and if I decrease it, it will basically kind of reduce it, and then it can go to negatives and it will go the other direction. So if I go back, you can see I can reduce the bevel amount of bevel. I want it not to be so angled. I want to reduce that. Or I can even go into a negative value and have it flipped in the other direction. If you want to carve into the model, you can do that as well. I won't cover the mitering stuff right now, but maybe I'll come back to them in a future lecture. But chamfer is pretty straightforward, so we'll go ahead and cover that one real quick. As I mentioned, that the segments automatically rounds up the form. That's what chamfer is. By default, the chamfer is on. It's trying to round this out. If you turn off the chamfer, it's going to do the bevel operation, but it's going to be completely planar, and it's just going to do the divisions. So again, if I just turn this off, it looks like that. I've used this very, very rarely. I generally, if I'm beveling, I tend to keep the chamfer on. However, you can totally turn it off. I've done a few projects where I've done it, where I need to measure things out, but overall, like I said, I mostly keep the chamfer on. So that's the bevel tool, at least the basics, but let's go ahead and talk about how this would work if you had different selections. And that's only the last thing you're going to cover on it. So that was just having a single edge selected. You can have as many edges as you want selected. For example, if I come and grab a cylinder, and this is no longer, like a cube, it had a top edge, but this has an edge that goes all the way around. So this cylinder this is an edge, this is an edge, this is an edge, and so on. So again, if we want to click an edge ring, we can go into edge mode by right-clicking and holding and hitting, go into edge. And I can double-click this edge loop once again to select it. So if I double-click this edge loop, any one of them actually, we can select an edge loop or ring, depending on which direction it's going. So if I bevel this, I'm beveling all these ones, and they're connected, they're interconnected, it'll keep the bevel contained. It will basically bevel all of it as one piece. So if I hit Control B now, Control Bravo now, you can see it beveled and keeps the whole thing contained. So you can increase or decrease the fractions. And if you want, you can type the numbers in here because I'm having a hard time. There we go. Or you increase the segments and so on. Or if you want to decrease the depth, I'm not sure what I'm making here. I'm just kind of showcasing the tool. You can see we can make random things. So this is a pretty powerful tool in making those edges. Now, a general rule here, which is good for rendering, I guess. We're kind of already on the subject, so we can talk about rendering right now. When it comes to 3D engines, I did flip my world upside down, but that's okay. When it comes to 3D engines, when you render something in the engine, or you have some sort of normal situation, which for those who don't know what that means, it's like how the light interacts with the normals do a lot, but one of the other things it does is how light interacts with an edge, meaning is it a hard edge or a soft edge. Having it be a hard edge like this is very CG looking, and oftentimes if you're doing any sort of fancy rendering, it's obvious. Like if you can kind of see, there's a really sharp transition here. If I were to create a light in this scene just to kind of showcase this, and I'm just going to go create light, directional light. And yes, I made my word upside down real quick. Rotate this. And I'm just moving the light by translating and rotating. Scale just affects the icon, but doesn't actually affect the light. You can see, I'm trying to hit this angle. And if I were to preview this, remember you can preview lights with hitting the 7 key. It looks okay. It's kind of a sharp transition. But if I were to render this, or if you were in a game engine, and depending on how good the render is, but most likely it should kind of behave the same way as this. If I were to render this using Maya software, we can kind of show what happens when you have such a crisp edge. I'm going to click on the render button, which is the little clapboard next to the eyeball, between the clapboard with the IPR. It's the one right in the middle. It's the second one on this list. So I'm going to do a render. It's probably going to render out as Arnold renderer first. It did. It was my last render. It's rendering. It's probably going to render really, really, really dark. Or I could hit escape and cancel this, which I think I'm going to do. So the escape key cancels. This one's to stop. Eventually. There it goes. I'm going to switch to software because I want a cheap render. Maya software is the cheap render. Arnold render is the more premium renderer. So I'm going to switch to Maya software. Render this again, top left in this one. And you can see that this cheap render shows off the light and how it's hitting here. I'm going to increase the intensity a little bit on this light for better showcase. So we'll select the light, attribute editor, just decrease this value a little bit. This is not trying to make it pretty here. I'm just trying to show an example here. It might be too bright, but we'll find out. So you can kind of see that there's obvious stage of brightness here. And the problem with this is it looks very CG. So oftentimes a bevel can help with these things. So I always tell students, if you have the poly count and you can spare it, like you don't have to worry about it at the beginning, but you can always come back in your modeling process and add bevels to kind of improve upon the rendering. So I don't know if you saw, but I can double click. I'm going to switch back to not lit mode. I double clicked an edge. I'm going to hit Control B. That's way too big of a bevel. Just a little bit of bevel. I'm going to go a little extreme on this one than I would for a video game, just because. And I'm going to go ahead and re-render this. Now, this won't look as good as if it were a more specular material, which I'm not going to go into all that, but it should show up. So let's go ahead and re-render this. And you can kind of see it catches the light a little bit more. Over here, it's not correct, but that's okay. I'm not going to fix that right now. But it kind of catches that light, and that's really good. And if this had a more specular material, it would be even more obvious that it's doing it. I'm just make that a little bit smaller. There again. You can see it catches that edge. It looks less CG. So I always recommend a bevel if you want to. If you have the poly counts to spare, it's not an issue, and you're trying to just get a slightly softer edge. There's other things wrong with this, like you can kind of see this triangulation here. That's just because the overall vertical is not very high res, but it's doable for for our demo here. All right. So again, I just strongly recommend bevels when you can afford them from a poly count perspective. They really help with your lighting situation. The other thing you might want to know about bevels is, as you can see, sometimes they create problems. I'm not sure why I did it here and not over here. I don't know if you guys can see that. It's like it's fine here, but right here, I don't know what Maya was thinking. It appears to be maybe I messed up somewhere, but I have a normal issue here. This is what I was kind of alluding to earlier. And this one's big in games and modeling. So actually I'm glad it kind of made this mistake because I can talk about how to fix them. So what's happening here is Maya, for whatever reason, properly got the smoothing angle correct, let's say from this edge. So it's round, 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 soft. But here, whatever reason, it got this edge and this edge and this edge right, but this edge is incorrect. It's almost like it's a hard edge, so it's rendering that weird clipping line there. So we can actually change how Maya sees it, if it sees it a soft edge or a hard edge, by adjusting the face normals of an edge. So this has nothing to do with the bevel tool, but the bevel tool did present us an opportunity here to talk about this problem. So what I can do is select these edges, and in fact I'm going to be really generous with my selection. I'm just going to switch to edge mode. I'm going to drag a big marquee box around all this top part right here. And I'm going to go ahead and go to Mesh Display in the menu. And I'm going to go down to this right here, Soften Harden Edges. I'm going to go down to Soften Edge. And what you'll see, in fact, actually, hold on, before I do that, make a copy, because I want you to see it before and after. Do this again, select those. Oh, there we go. All right. And what you should see is Mesh Display, Soften Edge. Is I lost that little sucker, but it's gone. I don't see the little hard edge anymore, as opposed to, I think it's right about right there. You can kind of see it zooming in. Oh, too much. You can see that edge is there. That's a hard edge. It might not be showing up in my monitor screen. I can't. Hopefully you guys can see it in the lecture. Advantages of HD, hopefully. So if you see weird things like that, that's a soft and hard edged case problem. And in fact, just to kind of recap, because that was very subtle, let me make a more obvious example. Now I'm going to actually just force this. So here's a hard-edged cube in every direction. And this is going to look awful, but I'm going to do it anyway. This is the other case you might see, is if I select this face, which in turn is me just selecting these 4 edges, which are already selected by face. But if I do that, I'm grabbing these 4 edges, go to Mesh Display, Soften Edge. Looks really weird. And that's because this top edges, all these 4 that I selected and went to Mesh Display, Soften Edge, are all soft edges, and it doesn't render quite right. So sometimes you can see when you're doing certain modeling operations, Maya might get it wrong. So you just got to kind of fix that. If I want to fix this, let's say I do want it to be a hard edge, come and select those edges, come back up to Mesh Display, Harden Edge. And you can see, there it is. It's all hard edge again. One more example, just to drive it home. There you go. You can see, I don't need the slide anymore. You can see we got a cylinder. Obviously, Maya is making everything soft edge by default on this. If I just select the entire object and go Mesh Display, hard edge, you can see you can get a faceted look on the object. So that's what soften edge and hard edge do. Again, they have nothing to do with bevel, but since the bevel tool accidentally created that problem, it was a great opportunity to show you that. So yeah, that is soften edge and hard edge. A little detour there. Let's go back to one last minor thing on bevel. Nothing big, just because I skipped over because I got sidetracked with the hard and soft edge. Is you don't have to have adjacent edges selected. In fact, you can have completely different edges selected when you bevel. So see 2 different corners here. Control B. You can see you can create those edges, fractions. Oop, don't go too crazy with the fractions. And segments. You can create something completely different. You can also do it by face mode. So for example, let's say if I select this face, and again, as I mentioned on the selecting edges for the display and soften and hardening, it's the same idea. When you select a different kind of component, you got to imagine in this case, face mode, it's grabbing all these edges. It's just easier for me to click on the face than go select all those edges. So I'm going to click on the face. Control B. You can see it beveled all those edges. You can see I don't want that much of a fraction in it this time. This thing's very sensitive, so maybe I'll just type. Oh, what the heck, that's good enough. It's a demo. Yeah, increase the segments. There you go. Maybe I'll do this side, same thing. Select that face. Again, right click, go to face mode. Select that face, Control B. And this might break it. Let's see. I'm going to reverse the depth. Yeah, I didn't think it was going to work because you can't go into that. Maybe. Let's use the segments first. Oh, yeah, there we go. Totally. So you can see my mistake. Just forgot to increase the segments first. So you can create interesting shapes just using the bevel tool already. You can kind of get some fascinating shapes. So again, the extrude tool is like my hammer in my toolbox. The bevel tool is like my screwdriver. I use these tools pretty heavily. Again, I'm glad they finally gave them quick keys. And for the bevel tool, it's Control B, Control Bravo. I think that's all for this lecture. All right, let's talk again. We'll keep going on the tools next one.